All right. Good morning, everyone. My name is Dr. Daniel Kelly. I am the Academic Director of Graduate Programs at the Preston Robert Tisch Institute for Global Sport. I'm also the Chair of the Board of Commissioners for COSMA. And so the presentation today, I'm about to share my screen in a second, is the meta-analysis on race and gender as far as our protocols and action items from the spring and summer of 2020, when we had all of the racial injustice and the entire inspiration behind this COSMA conference this year. So we will jump right into it. Okay. As I mentioned, the inspiration was going back to last summer, and so as you can see, I pulled some of the action items and the COSMA community statement from the website. This document is near and dear to my heart, as this was something that was needed at the time, as many organizations and just the community as a whole was responding to the death of George Floyd, the death of Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and just the maliciousness that was happening across the nation. And so, as a group, COSMA, we changed our bylaws to update to be more explicit when it comes to race and gender. We held a special election to elect more diverse candidates to our board of commissioners as well as board of directors. We held focus groups to have an understanding of what COSMA could do, action items. And, this conference became, one of those major action items. It became, as the race and equity in the sports industry, we planned from a year ago to have a purposeful, explicit, explanation of what we could do as a community of sport management scholars towards building sport management in the industry and also building opportunities for more people to take advantage. And so this study was a fantastic opportunity to kind of take a look back at what has happened and what has occurred in the past and what we could do as a framework for building for the future. And so one of the exciting aspects of it was, the final paragraph in our community statement, which talked about we acknowledge the difficulties students, faculty, and staff at our member institutions are feeling during this turbulent time. We are here to serve as a resource for improving diversity and inclusion initiatives for our community members and respective institutions. And so, that statement and this meta-analysis is kind of putting the accountability to the test. And so, we really want to talk about the accountability. We use the data-driven approach, and this is to have those tough, truthful conversations about the process and about where we are currently, what have we done, what have we missed, and to be fully transparent with how we can improve for the future. And, in my role as the chair of the Board of Commissioners, I'm primarily responsible for, helping Heather as we work with a group of 10 really busy but really accomplished scholars to review and provide compliance guidance to member institutions from around the country and around the world. And, this meta-analysis gives us another benchmark to really make sure that our processes and what we're doing is upholding those same standards. And so a meta-analysis is a method of synthesizing the results of previous research. And so what we did was we used this year's COSMA conference abstracts as the data, the submission process. We reviewed the reviewers, and a meta-analysis really gives you a chance to see holistically the areas for improvement and comprehensively to see where we can go moving forward. And so this is an exciting study because this is just year one. And then year two, you'll see the improvements, year three, year four, year five. And so as this becomes a compilation of data coming in for the conference abstracts, this becomes almost like a truth serum to hold us accountable to what we've done from the previous years. And so with this being the foundational year of the meta-analysis, it's going to be interesting to see the action items. And I think that's why we really want to socialize this information so we can receive feedback from our community to be able to make improvements. And so the meta-analysis model, as you can see, we'll start here on the, I guess on my left, probably your right side, on empowerment, moving towards a commitment. And then you'll see the moderators. And for our meta-analysis, the moderators are going to be our peer reviewers who are reviewing the abstracts. And so we'll break them down and we'll look at them as far as pseudonyms and the breakdown of what they accepted as far as the options they had for capable abstract talent for our 2021 conference. And so you're going to see this model a lot because I'm going to constantly keep referring to it to try to close the loop to make sure that when we get to our final action items, you see how it fits into the grand scheme of things. And so empowerment and commitment. Empowerment is known to be an important variable in operating an organization by motivating and stimulating members to assume psychological ownership. And so I want to take us back to what I did when we first started. I provided ownership because the emphasis of this entire year was in response to the race and gender issues that were happening last summer. And so, you know, the COSMA community, as well as COSMA as an organization itself, was empowered to make change, empowered to not only implicitly imply that we are compliant. You know, we could always say we have many diverse women and racial groups as part of our leadership and our membership, but to be forward thinking and proactive. And so that's where we go from empowerment to commitment. And the commitment is known to be a very important variable in assessing the psychological state of the members of an organization. And so, you know, explicitly titling this conference on race and gender, explicitly seeking to have one of the major topics of this conference be race and gender research. And you know, providing us with, you know, moderators or peer reviewers who have an understanding of what we're looking for this year so that we could be purposeful. And you're going to hear me use that term purposeful a lot throughout this presentation, because when it comes to a meta-analysis, the empowerment towards the commitment and the influence of the moderators, because obviously they're the ones who are reviewing all of the abstracts. And did we come to a proper conclusion? Did we meet our goals? And I think you'll see as we continue to assess and continue to gather data over the years, we'll be able to show a constant improvement, or at least action items towards where we are today versus where we could be in the future. And if you think about the COSMA process, it's the same way. You know, we meet every organization where they are. We figure out ways to give them best practices for improvements, and we give suggestions on how they can be better within the sport management community. Now, we never say you have to be like XYZ institution or you should be holding it up to this certain expectation. We give them different best practices, what has worked at other institutions, more to build a creative environment. And within this meta-analysis, we're looking to socialize this information to create a better environment to make sure that we are being held accountable as the leaders of COSMA. And so whether it's the board of directors or the board of commissioners, the goal is to make sure that we use a data-centric approach that provides information to make better decisions. And so empowerment and commitment. And then this right here is one of my favorite slides, because this is like the breakdown of the moderators, the reviewers for the meta-analysis. And what I did was we had 5 reviewers this year for the conference abstracts. I changed their names, of course, to pseudonyms, so that way we could protect their confidentiality. And, you know, what I did was I did add the gender, race, and academic credential markers, as well as institution, number of students, classification, just to give you a background hypothesis of their common traits. And so, as you can see from reviewer number 1, a Black female with a PhD working at a private institution of 7,000 students, that is by the Carnegie classification, a doctoral professional university, which means they offer, of course, doctoral degrees, law degrees, etc. And then reviewer number 2, male Caucasian with an EdD, private university, smaller, 3,500 students, master's, college, and university. With the designation from Carnegie, all it means is that the institution only gives bachelor's and master's degrees, but of course, doctorally qualified candidates can work there and should work there. Reviewer number 3, male Caucasian with an MBA, but is also a doctoral candidate. You know, he'll receive his PhD hopefully by this year, 2021. From a public university, 19,000 students. Also a master's college's university's designation by the Carnegie classification. Reviewer number 4, male Caucasian with a PhD, private university, 22,000 students. Doctoral professional university by the Carnegie classifications. And then finally, our 5th reviewer, Caucasian PhD from public university, 6,500 students, master's, colleges, and degrees from the Carnegie classification. So what we see here is that the reviewers come from, very different backgrounds. At least, there was an attempt to bring in gender and racial equality this year, which shows that, at least step one with the process um, for race and gender, for improving diversity and inclusion for this COSMA process, that the attempt was successful, which is what you hope to see, that organically that we are putting our words into action. And so from this process, a very diverse group that gives us a strong baseline for the types of studies that were accepted. And so that's why I love to really harness in and focus on this slide, because it really gives a understanding of where we are currently, and we can kind of establish a strong baseline for what can happen in the future. And so from here, the review process, each abstract was reviewed by 2 of the 5 reviewers. Reviewers graded both the virtual and written submissions, and I think that's where we're going to see there's an area of contention to a certain extent, because due to the nature of the virtual submissions, a blind review process was not really possible. And so traditionally, a blind review process is the method for um, cons- let's say, conference abstract submissions and that process. And so we were being technically savvy this year and really um, embracing the virtual modality with the virtual submissions. And so that's something we'll probably need to take into consideration, because when we get to our implications, when you don't have a blind process, there could be a concern of implicit or unknown bias. And so there's just opportunities to try to make sure the process is fair. But I think, overall, nothing's wrong with technology and figuring out ways to embrace it. And from here, I pulled the topics that had a race and gender explicit identification, which is what I thought was kind of cool, because when we get to the numbers later on, you'll see why this is very significant. We had some fantastic titles this year. One of the keynotes was on a commitment to social justice, and with the WNBA, we had adaptive leadership approach for increasing diversity in the sport management workplace, athlete activism, effective strategies for discussing social unrest. What we saw was, the community of scholars were embracing these topics and embracing the opportunity to bring this type of relevant current research to the forefront of what we're doing in sport management. And so, you know, considering past, every conference has a different theme and different categories. And for COSMA, I'm going to get to our process and the different categories for submissions. And even though the conference has a theme, COSMA is still a compliance and accreditation body. And so there's still different topics on best practices, on what's working in the global space, and everything is not race and gender. But it was nice to see that there was an uptick in race and gender topics this year, which is pretty exciting. Higher education mentoring, summary of framework for mentoring programs, inclusion and diversity in the sports academy, moving towards more socially conscious oversight of social justice and quality assurance. So, people were embracing the new theme and the topics, and, having a race and gender representation on the reviewers, you see that the direct correlation. And for other topics, practical solutions for incorporating disability in sport management, encouraging, promoting opportunities for diverse academic programs and educators. A lot of these themes, were emerging over the summer when we had the focus groups. We did a 3-part series of focus groups over the summer, and they were fantastic. They were great opportunities led by our board of directors and board of commissioners for engaging the community and figuring out what is missing for us to be more conscious, explicit, and just overall progressive when it comes to embracing race and gender. And teaching sport management from inside the NBA bubble, just the lessons that were learned from all of the professional sport leagues that were embracing Black Lives Matter, and just being able to see the impact of these topics. This is why I wanted to kind of break down. So now we go from the reviewers, the demographics, to the actual topics that were chosen, to the race and gender equity of the abstract. So this is right here an analysis of the actual results of what were in your conference programming, the videos and the presentations that you have had the opportunity to view all week long and to fully embrace and to be intellectually stimulated. And so 21 race and gender abstract topics, 57 total presentations. So about 39% of the total accepted presentations had a race and equity and sport management emphasis, which is fantastic. You're talking about almost 40%. And we have six different, categories for what can be accepted for this conference. And so to have 40%, is a major uptick. And that's a fantastic baseline as we continue to look to bring in more talent, look to be able to use this as a baseline for future studies coming up next year and the year after on our emphasis on building race and gender and equality and equity in the workplace and sport management. And so, seeing as how it's one of the six topics, it could have been as low as 15 to 18% overall, but it was actually double that. It was at 39%, which shows that, right away, the emphasis on race and gender, really endeared us to many of our colleagues in the sport management community, which is fantastic. Additionally, breaking down the race and gender statistics, selected abstracts, 51 total accepted presenters, 35 abstracts. So that means that there were 35 actual first authors and 16 co-authors. And so, first authors made up about 69% of the presenters, and a lot of presentations, as you can see, were single authors, which is fine. The gender breakdown was pretty diverse. 53% male, 47% female. The racial breakdown, 26% Black and 74% Caucasian. I actually went through the results like multiple times and could not find any Asians, which I do know that we do have a very high percentage of our membership is Asian. And when I say high, I mean relatively high, of course, but it still exists. And if you've been to our conferences before, you know that we do have many visitors and members of many ethnic groups. And so I think as we continue to push forward, looking to target and engage with the different ethnicities to make sure that they not only submit an abstract, but they continue to attend our conference and our resources and they don't feel left out. It's kind of like that that long time debate between all lives matter and Black lives matter. They're not mutually exclusive. They can work together. And so just making sure that because there was an emphasis on Black lives matter this year, that it does not exclude other groups from feeling like they are included in this movement. And from here to race and gender, statistics, the education breakdown, I broke it down by some interesting categories to kind of keep it interesting. So I broke down the education and the PhD breakdown. And so between the PhD and EdD, that came up to 76% of the accepted abstracts, 4% were JDs, and then MS and MA was 20%. And then out of the PhD breakdown and EdD breakdown, 69% had PhDs and the EdD 31%. And so what we're seeing is that the scholarly community came out. And I think what this shows is that, there could be potential areas to engage, non-academic participants, to bring them into the fold. We could seek out more sport lawyers, sport attorneys, and more sport management community members who may not have traditional academic degrees or credentials, because there were a lot of the MS and MAs who are doctoral candidates, which means that they're on the cusp of becoming PhD and EdDs. And so just something to keep in consideration as we go through the data. From here, we also looked at the racial breakdown for the first authors and second authors. And so we saw for first authors, 20% first authors were Black, second authors, 30% were Black. And then for Caucasian, the same thing. First authors were 80%, second authors 69%. And so what we're seeing here is that this is like a conversation we had over the summer. We're seeing that the numbers are skewing to certain predominant groups, but the thought process is, are there enough racially and gender-based candidates to submit abstracts or to even show interest? And one of the major conversations we have, and we'll get to in implications, is building a pipeline. And I want to talk about that pipeline when we get to the Q&A, because it's a great opportunity for additional conversation. Um, and so we get to our implications. We went through the reviewers, we went through the process of empowerment and commitment, and then we got to the actual results of the abstracts. And so, as I mentioned before, there's a potential bias in the review process because of implicit bias. There's always the race and gender demographics of reviewers. The bottom line is, because it wasn't a blind process, that there could always be some kind of implicit bias. And as a group, we could do some implicit bias training, which the time is now, just to bring it to the consciousness. And so, with the blind process through written abstracts, you kind of have a way of avoiding visual misinterpretation that can happen by having the recorded sessions by each of the abstract submissions. Next, the convenience of virtual abstract submissions may need to be revisited. As I mentioned before, that's just a nature of the beast when you embrace technology, but that's something that can always be talked about, especially when it comes to the process. This is what I want to talk about: the opportunity for the development of a pipeline to boost race and gender statistics. So, I think one of our next steps, we've had conversations about pipelines with HBCUs, or as Darlene Kluka, one of my favorite colleagues, would always say, minority serving institutions, MSIs, the conversation about, building up those pipelines, mentor programs, and embracing diverse candidates. But I want to talk about a pipeline program that I work on currently with one of the four major sport leagues in the U.S. And, um, we had conversations about embracing with them Black Lives Matter and women empowerment movement. And I just remember they told us that those types of programs become labeled with a stigma, and the last thing they want to do is give their high potential employees a stigma as they're trying to matriculate in the league office and trying to move up to higher levels and higher positions. And so what they do is they label the program high potentials, and then implicitly they recruit minority and women candidates to be a part of those high potential programs. And so when you become a graduate, or you complete those high potential programs, you're not labeled as someone who graduated from a diversity program. You're labeled as somebody who graduated from a high potential program. And so almost that simple switch to a sport management high potential mentorship program, a sport management high potential um, doctoral mentorship program. So just figuring out a way to label it as, high potential candidates that are being mentored for future leadership in COSMA, future leadership in NASM, future leadership overall in the industry of sport management. That way it takes away the stigma, and that way you can kind of meet your goals of providing your high potential minority and women candidates with opportunities for leadership without the stigma. And, sadly, it is 2021, but the stigma does exist. Diversity is one of those hot button topics that comes and goes every 5 to 10, 10 to 15 years. And, there's always a big burst, and then it just subsides, and then something terrible happens in the world, and then it becomes back in the forefront of our consciousness. And if you want to maintain the consistency of, building race and gender equity and equality, the pipeline programs of high potential seems to be a very successful manner to do so. And then lastly, encouraging partnerships for future conferences for race and gender diversity. I think making it more the norm than just the hot button topic. And so by embracing conference partnerships, we've seen this year with the WNBA and many different teams, Oklahoma City Thunder, there were just fantastic partnerships that came about this year that just shows the commitment to excellence. And I had a great opportunity with Bethany Donovan, who is the head of league operations for the WNBA, a chance to talk to her and pick her brain about the social justice and the opportunities that the WNBA has embraced this year. And one of the main comments she made was, the partnerships, the allies, that's why they were successful. Even her own personal story of being able to engage in social justice, it came organically because she had opportunities that were provided to her by a support system of people who believed in what she was capable of doing. And so, it's almost like that paying it forward, each one teach one opportunity to be able to see the effectiveness of what it could be. So we can hopefully have some time for a couple of questions.
Dr. Kelly, that was great. What is your, do you have any suggestions for the video submission abstract? Is that something like, oh, just scrap it, let's go back to kind of written abstracts? Or because we obviously that in, we talked about this, right? Even if you just do audio, you
Yeah,
can generally still tell a lot off that, right?
correct, correct.
And so we offered the written abstract as well for people that were worried about that. And we saw we didn't get a real high number of those. So I don't know what the way around that is, if we're going to embrace technology, if we're going to, I, I don't know.
No, so I think you made some great points. So, I think that's a part of the situation. So for me, I say we keep it. We keep the video abstracts. I thought it was a fantastic addition, and it was a game changer this year, as you saw from the number of video submissions that came in this year. The conference was virtual. Let's be honest. I mean,
Yeah.
it was a fantastic experience, and the presentations were coming in early. It was more efficient, and so I think more so than scrapping the video submissions, I would say increase the number of reviewers, and then that way the numbers will even out. And
Okay.
so I know in years past we've had like double-digit reviewers, and this year it was 5. And so I think if you increase the number of reviewers, that still gives the opportunities for reaching that threshold for reliability. And so that would give us maybe increase it, instead of 2 submissions, they can read 3 submissions. That way we get more of an emphasis on the critique and the opportunities. And so that would be kind of cool moving forward.
Great. That's a good suggestion.
All right. But overall, as I mentioned earlier in this presentation, the emphasis is that it's about accountability. So now that we have a baseline of numbers, imagine next year we can see where the numbers are. We can implement programs. We can see the benefits of the focus groups, the benefits of the conference topics. And if we change the topics, how does that impact the race and gender submissions? Are we getting the same quality, the opportunities? I think no matter what, with this data-centric approach, we're going to be fantastic for next year.
Yeah, and I think with, and I don't want to speak too much to accreditation, that's Heather's area, but I think that has become much more of an emphasis as in a part of accreditation, right? Diversity and inclusion.
Yeah.
And so I think that if we're going to go forward with this traditional tracks type submission, that should always be a research track. And maybe, right, it's not the 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 theme, the main theme like it is this year. Like COVID isn't the main theme this year, but it had to be something that
Correct.
there was submissions on because it's so prevalent.
Yeah.
Maybe it's something that's always a research track, right? Because it's always an important conversation. It's always something that can be being improved. So
Yeah, and I think,
yeah.
and to your point, to a certain extent, we've done that implicitly. Where I think, as you pointed out, moving forward, making it an official track and doing it explicitly. And so, I think COSMA organically is an ally organization that has embraced race and gender. And what we did was, when we assessed things over the summer, we realized that, hey, we're doing everything, we're just not telling anybody. So no one knew. And so you have all these organizations making these public statements, and we made a public statement just recanting what we already did, how we were already working towards it, and we still did more. And we did extra opportunities. We put together this fantastic conference with amazing panelists and amazing topics, amazing breakout sessions, Q&As, and we hit on 40%, which is a fantastic number considering this is a compliance conference, and the number of different topics, 6 different topics you could choose from. We still hit this fantastic level. So I think this is a great benchmark to hit. And I think, it's more just explaining to the rest of the world, this is what we already do for a living. So it's pretty cool.
Have you guys considered at some point in time, if you stay with the videos, having people at some point submit a written abstract? I just think of it from a perspective of, for doc students, and just the emphasis that we put on writing and the emphasis that's put on scholarly research. So for me, and I did do, we did do a written abstract just because we're working on a paper. So building that out times the written abstract, whether it's for future citations or I just wonder if that's something, I think that for me, that was important because that written abstract adds, it makes you kind of dive into the lit and what other studies are being done. And I mean, I didn't see the video abstract, so I just wondered if you guys saw a difference in written abstract, maybe really probably lit
Yeah,
review or
I'm
a
with you.
deeper dive into, I just wonder if you guys saw a difference in that.
Yeah. And Dr. Kelly, I'll jump in if you don't mind here.
Yeah, of course.
This is, I think we haven't talked about exactly what the submission process is going to look like next year. The video abstract was as much about the content as it was about the presentation, right? So if you were someone, this is completely virtual, they're pre-recorded presentations. We wanted every presenter to be engaging, right? That's hard in a pre-recorded setting. So the rejections that we got for the most part were someone sitting there literally holding a sheet of paper. I could see them reading from a script and it was just monotone, and it was, their recording's going to be this, it's going to devalue our conference, right? If that's one of the first presentations you watch as an attendee, you might be like, oh, I don't know if I'm going to check out anymore. So that was more this year about screening how engaging you were going to be and how you were going to be able to convey the value of the research you were talking about through a pre-recorded session, right? Your and Dr. Jansen's was really good, but you could see how potentially that could be really hard, and it would just kind of sound like you were talking to yourself and not be engaging with your viewers. So, you know, that was this year specific. Haven't necessarily talked about 2022. But definitely the value of learning how to submit as a doctoral candidate, learning how to submit a written abstract to a conference was part of my studies, right? Like that was a huge part, because you have to present at conferences, you have to present yourself well in a written format. So absolutely, that's something to think about and a really good point for sure. So definitely take that into consideration for next year.
Maybe Chris, you can make a little tutorial video, little explainer video on how to make a good conference video.
I do like to make the tutorials, right?
Like
Did you
that.
watch?
It's funny because my students are doing these explainer videos right now with the Miami Marlins, and I had to put together like they make videos all the time, but then you have to, then they submit something where they're just reading something to you, and I'm like,
Yeah.
I know your TikTok videos don't look like that.
That's actually a good idea if we do the video format, using ones for this year, I think, too, and saying, hey, here's a really good example of a 2-minute video abstract from this year, getting the presenter's presentation and using that as an example, I think is actually a really good idea as well. That I
would say the written abstracts are not always that great. So sometimes I have no idea, the people are not expressing themselves well. So it's not always that helpful. So I think it's an imperfect system. It was kind of an experiment. So your feedback is really important, and it doesn't mean we'll always do it this way or we'll never do it this way again, or we don't know yet. And we'll just kind of have to, part of reflecting on it was to like from Daniel reflecting on it was to understand what unintentional barriers or problems, and I'm sorry I came in the last 5 minutes, there were. So I will watch the Q&A. I had to be in another Q&A.
Yeah, I'll also send you the deck as well, so that works.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, perfect.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you for attending this session. This was fantastic, and it was, especially being on the board of commissioners, it's good to be able to see how the sausage is made and how behind the scenes and all the, the whole process is for the conference, because it allows me to be able to understand, how we can make improvements and how we can better advise our member institutions. So this process was worthwhile. Thank you.
Great.
Thank you for doing it.
All right.
Bye, everyone.